everyone. Sorry, I was having some phone rotation issues there. um, Hopefully, you guys are all doing well today. It is Tuesday, noon Eastern. I am Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com. And I'm here today to talk to you about trauma. And as you guys know, I talk about a lot of different topics. And today, I want to bring it back to abuser strategies. This is something that I talk about frequently enough, but a lot of times I'll put the focus on like our healing our trauma. But today I want to talk about some of these strategies. All of the normal healing approaches apply to working through these strategies, but I think it can be really helpful in our journey to, understand and bring awareness to the kinds of things they do that generally keeps us stuck in our lives. So that's kind of the angle I'm taking today, is really looking at what makes us stuck. I want to say hi to Jan. Thank you for being here. And what kind of strategies they use. And I'll be honest, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are generally strategies that build futility or hopelessness in our system. So that is a very kind of purposeful strategy that abusive families will take. They are trying to make us feel like there is no point. And sometimes this is referred to, like I hear it referred to as things like breaking a child, for example. We have to break the child. If the child is too strong, too confident, too boisterous, too extroverted, too talkative, too all of the things, right? They are a danger, especially to these particular types of families. So they have to work hard to kind of break that out of the child. And, sometimes that can be as simple as just telling the child, you are not extroverted. Like, I've had many people talk to me and I'm like, yeah, this person is definitely an extroverted person. This person, you can tell that their gifts and their purpose are really built in being an extroverted person, but they have quite literally been told by their family, this is gaslighting 101, that they're an introvert. And I'm talking to them going, I hear you say you're an introvert, but I don't think so. So yes, our family will even gaslight us, and this is not one of the strategies I included, but by telling us that we aren't what we are, okay? And a lot of this in our system over time, it builds this futility. The problem is also the futility, but there's another problem, which is sometimes a bigger problem, which is that we will then create a defensive structure to block the futility. Okay, so if we were all able to see our futility all the time and we were always impacted by it, we would likely find a way to deal with it, okay? But for probably at least 60 to 75% of human beings, the controllers in us then block that karma kit, okay? So they block that futility and hopelessness that lives with the karma kit. So by blocking it, it's not very obvious that we even have it. As a matter of fact, futility or hopelessness often doesn't even get included as a main emotion in our system. Like, I am here to tell you, it's huge. But many times people are just not aware of it as an emotion. And that's because there is such a strong controller numbing attempt that is happening with that futility. So while the futility isn't obvious, it still takes like a massive amount of energy for us to do anything, especially things we really want to do or we really feel are important to us. So the strategy from the abusers is make that futility strong. Okay, like that's the goal. Bring that hopelessness to levels that will really keep that child from really sort of climbing out of that traumatic hole that they may be in. And so I want to talk about what are some of the strategies to do that and really build that. And these may be things you relate to, maybe not every one of them. But I want to talk about each one of these because they can be critical to our healing journey to kind of release these things from our system, basically. So I want to say hi to Trish. Thank you for being here too. So the first one I want to talk about, and I will tell you what, I've been really focused on this one lately. Not that I've not been focused on it before, but I just see it so much more as the key to freedom to address this particular thing. And that is that we need to acknowledge that our family, and that one of their primary strategies was in fact to make us dissociate. Now, when I talk about these strategies, many times they are not conscious. What I mean by that is the family isn't sitting around some table in the dining room going, how are we going to do this? No. This is generational trauma repeating itself. So I like to refer to this as unconsciously on purpose, okay? So yes, there can be things that are quite conscious, but a lot of the strategies I'm discussing today are our family members repeating exactly what happened to them. And a lot of those strategies are coming from their own dissociation and their own inner parts and the activities that they need to do because they were done to them. So I want to be really clear. Again, understanding that is so we don't blame ourselves for it, not so we block our anger, okay? Our anger is still very important. We can acknowledge that this is generational trauma, and we can be angry about what happened to us. That is fine. That's a yes and scenario, right? So, the first strategy is families dissociate us. They work hard to get us dissociated. Because what happens when we are dissociated? We are forgetting things. We are often forgetting many things that happen to us. And what I say over and over and over again is if we don't have many memories of our childhood, that is not because our childhood was good. Okay? We don't forget the good stuff. Okay. I mean, yes, I understand that we may not hold every positive memory in our memory bank all the time. No. But if we have blatantly forgotten things, and especially if we have forgotten the majority of our childhood, we are dissociating because things were bad. Okay, that is the number one rule that I tell people when they contact me and say and ask if they've forgotten trauma. But if we have learned how to dissociate in childhood, if we have learned how to forget things, if we have kind of built that skill, that survival skill in our system, and we've honed it, honestly, it requires quite a lot of intelligence to really do that. This is really tricky stuff. But as we build that skill, that means that continues to be available to us in our adult lives. And I know it is very disconcerting to consider the possibility that you are forgetting some of your adult experiences. But it's important to at least let ourselves acknowledge that something like that might in fact be happening. Because if we dissociated in childhood, there's a chance we're still able to do that in our adult lives. And if families are relying on our dissociation, they will potentially continue to do things that make it happen. Okay? These don't always have to be super, super trauma kind of based events that would make the news. They can be, phrases they're telling us. They could be, just insults and just generally things that remind us of what it was like when we were a child. Those are going to be the things we will forget. But in forgetting those things, it doesn't allow us to protect ourselves. It doesn't allow us to make choices to establish safety for ourselves. And if we have not established full levels of safety in our adult lives, because we are still potentially being impacted by traumatic events, we will be operating from our parts, and we will not be addressing our hopelessness in the way that we need to. So it gets us stuck. And I'll be honest, in worst case scenarios, these kind of people will continue traumatizing us into our adult lives in order to maintain a level of dissociation that they feel is needed. So that is always a possibility too. It's something we need to be considering. I know that feels really disconcerting to be like, oh my gosh, is there something I'm not remembering? That would be awful. But I also think that sometimes the most troubling realizations are often the truths we need to hear. So I wanted to start with that one. So if you're still with me after that one, that's pretty impressive. So now we can talk about some of these other ones, which are likely to impact you as well. The first one is, after the dissociation one, is that they teach us not to trust ourselves, okay? This is very important. Because when we're kids, we usually know intuitively that something is pretty wrong. We get that. Like, yes, okay, maybe it is the water we swim in, maybe it is what we have always known, but something tells us this isn't okay, right? Like, we get that. When we're children, and sometimes we have to be pretty young children because of the trauma, we often are more intuitive than we are at any other time in our lives until we start doing recovery work. But this is where the gaslighting comes in, right? Like, they tell us we need to trust them over self. Like, that's a big message we hear. You don't know. Your interpretation is wrong. You're not getting it right. What you think happened is not at all what happened. Your reaction, your emotional reaction in your body is inaccurate, right? So we hear these kind of things. And what they tell us instead is you just need to listen to us. What we tell you is right. What you tell yourself is wrong. Okay? This is a very, very big strategy, which shuts us down from our most wise, intuitive self. And since we don't trust ourselves, we are usually going to end up listening to unsafe people. Even once we become adults, we will have a tendency to listen to people who remind us, for example, of our family of origin, because we're not trusting ourselves enough yet to be able to discern that those people are not safe for us. So when we were listening to our families as children, as adults, maybe we've managed to kind of step back from our family, but then we have a tendency to bring into our space people who still are a little too much like our family of origin. So the next strategy I want to talk about is that they teach us not to trust others who think differently than they do. And this can also start very, very young, right? Because, these kind of families can't necessarily raise kids without having any connection to systems in the rest of the world. For example, educational systems, medical systems, children who are experiencing trauma and abuse will interact with these systems. So this is sort of a safeguard for the family to try to make a child feel like others who have different opinions are actually not trustworthy, not correct, not good, solid people for us to get information from. They can even go as far as to say that people that try to convince you that what's happening to you and your family is wrong, they are like cult members or cult leaders, when in fact it may be that your family is the ones that's acting like the cult. But they'll try to convince you. Like, there are serious problems with people who are giving you different messages to what the family's giving you. Okay, so this is really important. They will work with this, right? So as children, we learn not to trust the teachers or the medical professionals that might be saying, things don't seem right there. We learn that they're not safe people, even though in reality they may in fact be safe. But we also have already learned not to trust our intuition. So intuitively, we might be thinking, yeah, this person seems like a reasonable human being, but we already know we can't trust that, right? And then we've got the family saying, don't trust these people, right? So that is a big way that they work. But then what happens is we come to adulthood and we start to do things like, read books, go to therapy, find new information out there. Now we've got hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos with perspectives that we can start to take in, right? Even if we don't read books, information is everywhere. And yet there's still going to be this place in us potentially that has been told that we can't trust any of that information. And it can make it very hard for us to start exploring how we might want to think in a different way. Because that, this is again, karmic. They're coming up really strong going, don't trust it, don't trust it, don't trust it. That person is not safe. That person is telling you things different from your family, so they're bad. That's the kind of thing we're hearing. So it's very, very hard for us to allow ourselves to take in new information. And that's sort of what the strategy was all about. We don't, the family doesn't want you to have things you can consider in addition to the information they're providing. Like their information is always the correct information, right? And I see this a lot with clients that I work with, where that karma kid will come up and go, she's not safe, she is not trustworthy, right? And that's something I work with my clients. We work with that all the time. But that is a big message that is often there, especially once I start really challenging those belief systems that came out of childhood. Then we usually will hear from that karma kid. So the next one is that the family will attack or block what we love the most. Okay? This is such a critical thing to understand. Okay? Like, for example, like this is something I hear all the time, so I'm going to tell you, please do not believe this idea that if it is meant to be, it will be easy. I am here to tell you that most of the time, the things where we are attacked the most are the things that are the most meant to be for us. The things that are really our ultimate purpose, our ultimate place that we're supposed to be going in life, right, is going to be where we get the most attacks. And by attacks, I'm not necessarily meaning physical attacks, but I would also, say it might be. I mean, it certainly could be. But it's more that families who know that there are things that make us feel really confident, that make us feel really good about ourselves, that move in the direction of our strengths, that those things are potentially dangerous because they can build confidence in us, the confidence we need in order to question what's going on in our lives. So I really want to stress that if there's something you've always wanted to do, but every time you think about doing it, your system moves into like anxiety and you get paralyzed and all you hear are messages in your system telling you don't do that thing. That thing may be something worth exploring. That thing may actually be your direction. What I find is that even when, those things have been kind of attacked for many, many years, they don't go away. They still show up. We still hear, yeah, I should really look into this. But the backlash, that kind of thing that comes up next is so intense, both emotionally and from a beliefs perspective, that we just step away. We just step away from it. We can't do it because we don't know how to process the resistance to it. And that's, of course, where I can help because this is precisely what happens in our systems. Like, we start to hear all the things that our family of origin told us about that thing that means we can't do it. And yes, it can be things like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough to do that thing. But it can also be like practical matters. You can't make any money off of that. You don't have the time for that. That's just a waste. That's not going anywhere. That'll never go anywhere. Well, it may just be stuff that sounds very logical and practical. But it's stopping us in our tracks, right? This is one of those stuck things that we want to keep exploring. I have a couple comments here. I want to take a bit and read those. Bernadette is saying, hi, Elizabeth Ben. While body shutting down, not feeling, is that automatic controller barely embodied? Yes, that is controller. When the body is shutting down, when we're not feeling, when we're totally numb, that is the controller blocking us from what the body is attempting to say. And one of the best things we could do in those situations is intermittent, tiny bits of grounding. And I'm talking about 30 seconds at a time, really pulling yourself into the body, and then allowing yourself to do some writing from the controller who says, don't do that. So the controller is dissociating you. They think they're doing you a favor. They're clearly terrified of the emotions that they are blocking. And so we need to hear from them about that. So when you feel yourself being really numb, do some grounding and write from the controller's generally terror of moving into the body. And do it in little tiny bits, what you can tolerate at first, and that will grow over time. So Jan is saying, I am finding it difficult physically listening to this information today. Clearly deep core issues. I am staying with it as it helps me acknowledge how I lived my life without safety and trust, but never realized it unlocking truths for me. Deep breaths. Yeah. When it's hard to hear what I have to say, and I'll be honest, a lot of times it is. That's pretty common. It is because there's some truths that the controller and karma kid don't really want you to get in touch with. And I will say, I started with a doozy, okay? I the first one that I talked about being dissociation. That is a huge, huge issue for our defenders. They do not want you to understand that. Dissociation is so hard for us to see. Most of the time we've lived in it for most of our lives, right? So it is the water we swim in. And the controller especially relies upon our lack of awareness of our dissociative levels to keep us blocked, sort of like what Bernadette was talking about. They rely on that. So yeah, it can be very hard to hear what I'm saying today. And if you are sticking with it, that says a lot about you and your ability to stick with some really intense information. Also, we are often taught that our childhoods aren't that bad. So I'm over here telling you that families can do some pretty bad things to us when we come out of childhood and we're dealing with complex trauma. There's often more that has happened than we're acknowledging. Right, again, the dissociation. So yes, it will be hard to listen to this. So congrats for sticking with it. Definitely deep breaths, definitely grounding into the feet. One of my favorite things to do is focus on my breath and my feet at the same time. It feels almost like I'm breathing into my feet, which, yes, I acknowledge is not a thing, but it feels that way, and it really helps bring me down into the body so that I can see what's there. And I'm in the process of remembering something right now, and I can feel like when I'm remembering, my dissociation can get initially worse, and I can feel my controller just trying to zip me up. And I like to say to zip you up, top of your head. And I keep repeatedly and relentlessly pulling myself back down into the body. Sometimes it's more successful than other times, right? But this is a part of the work, and consistently as we can, pulling ourselves back down into the body is one of the best strategies for getting where we need to go, for sure. So, the last one I have for you today about strategies that make us feel stuck is that they make us believe we are unworthy, right? Now, this one may not be a big shock to you today. Out of everything I've talked about, this one might be the least shocking. But they will go about life consistently ranking both of the family as a whole and against society and us within the family. And they do this ranking to try to make us feel like we are unworthy of the life that we actually know we're supposed to live. So they will rank the family in society. So they'll say, like, well, some families are allowed those things, but our family isn't. Now, again, this might come very inconsistently. At other times, they might just, depending on the part they're in, they might be thinking, I'm the best thing that ever existed. It's that this family is so much better than all the other families. So you might hear that. But more than likely, there will also be this karmic interpretation coming from the family level, saying, we're not the lucky ones, kind of a thing. But then in addition to that, they're also doing that within the family, right? Within the family, where they're like, you're on this particular totem pole of people, you're at the bottom. And maybe you're not. Maybe there's a sibling or a dog or a cat or something that gets ranked below you for whatever reason. Every role in every family is different. But in general, you will definitely be below all the adults. And the truth is that children are treated the most poorly of people on the planet, generally speaking. And that's because we can, right? We can. Now, yes, there are safeguards that are put out there, but let's face it, most of the traumas that we experienced happened behind closed doors, right? There wasn't anybody there to witness it. And a lot of these strategies I've talked about today do still work in modern society. I mean, even though we're doing more to try to stop this stuff, we're not there. We're not protecting children the way we need to protect them. It isn't happening, right? So, when you think about the unworthiness, like when you feel that karmic kid in there going, I'm not good enough for that, I'm not good enough for that, I can't do that, others might be able to do that, but I can't do that, right? When we start to kind of sense that kind of inner self-talk going, remember, that's not credible talk, because that talk came from people in our family and was told to that karmic kid. Those aren't facts. Those aren't facts. But one of the biggest ways that we work with this is that we write from the hopelessness and futility. We really let that write. All the things that get said and the shame that backs up that futility, because futility is often shame-fueled. So we want to let those things write, because that helps us to start to see that none of that stuff has any real credibility, and that it all came from people who were jealous of us or just not healthy in their own right, and projecting their own trauma onto us. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you found this helpful. I know that some of these topics were probably really hard to hear because your defenders were probably really not liking it. So I appreciate you. If you were able to stick with me all the way to the end, that's impressive. So thank you all. And I look forward to talking to you next week on another trauma topic. We'll be having a little visitor. I think her name is going to be Helene. That's our hurricane in Florida this week. So I'll come to you next week on the aftermath of that, which I will say, being in Central Florida, it shouldn't be terrible. We don't get hit as hard as the coast, but we'll go through it and it'll be fine. That's what I'm telling myself. Florida's used to it. So thank you all so much, and I will talk to you next Tuesday.